Serhii Plokhy, in your book, Chernobyl Roulette, you set the scene for the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the misinformation about a dirty bomb that Russia accused Ukraine of developing. Tell us what happened next.
What happened next was something that very few people expected. The Russian army attacked Ukraine from territory of Belarus, allegedly a sovereign state, and it marched toward Kiev through the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the nuclear disaster zone, that no one really expected Russians to be so reckless with regard to the lives and health of their own soldiers and their officers. But this is exactly what happened.
And the Russian troops were tasked with searching for this illusory dirty bomb at great risk to themselves and also the Ukrainians who were working at the plant.
Exactly. They became to a degree victims of their own propaganda, because talking about the Ukrainian dirty bomb was one of the ways to justify unjustifiable attack on the sovereign state. And the soldiers and the officers who occupied the Chernobyl nuclear power plant were really expected to prove the Russian propaganda to be right. And they started to do really very crazy things, including digging or preparing to dig into the debris and the waste, the radioactive waste that was buried after the Chernobyl accident of 1986. So some of the Ukrainian operators convinced them not to do that, because they would expose certainly not just themselves but also everyone at the plant to this really nuclear danger, bringing back Chernobyl 1986 alive and allowing it to claim more victims.
And it's incredible, really, to learn from your book of the heroism of, for example, the foreman, Valentin Hayko, who really changed the power dynamics, turned the tables, really, on the occupying forces. Explain how they did that, because it's very clever, isn't it? How they, and you know, incredibly brave.
Brave and clever, and also, if you would look at Valentin Hayko, you wouldn't expect any acts of heroism from him, despite the fact that he came and started work in Chernobyl in 1987, 1 year after the accident. But what he did, he actually turned the fact that he and his people had knowledge of the place, had expertise, when the Russians had zero. And what he told them right away, that they entered a very special complex, that the rules of the International Atomic Energy Agency and the laws of Ukraine would have to apply there, and that they were not allowed freely to get around the nuclear power plant. There were some areas where Hayko insisted that he would have the right to issue permits, and they issued 15 permits altogether for a particular group of Russians to get into those most sensitive parts of the nuclear power plant. And that was the case where really knowledge became power. And I think about that story as the Russian army coming and kidnapping the Ukrainian personnel there, but then kidnappers kidnap the kidnappers, yeah, by using their knowledge, and also fear of nuclear and nuclear radiation that certainly Russians demonstrated.
And you know, whether it's the old Chernobyl site or it's Zaporizhia, a functioning nuclear plant in Ukraine, or Kursk in Russia, how close are we to potential nuclear disaster? What is the prospect of that again?
The nuclear disasters that happened so far, the largest ones, like Chernobyl, like Fukushima, like 3 Mile Island, Windscale fire here in England, they happened during peacetime, without war happening on the site, without missiles hitting the buildings of the nuclear power plant like it happened in Zaporizhia. And still, the accidents were there. So now the chances of another accident has increased dramatically. This is if we are talking about the accident. But there is also a chance that certainly Russians who are now in control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant could try to use some sort of an accident as a diversion. And that's another possibility that is out there. So
we're worrying all the time about Russia using nuclear weapons throughout the war. That's been a worry in the background. It hasn't materialized. But actually, these nuclear plants have been or could be weaponized.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's possible actually to create an accident and hide behind other side, behind the enemy. That's what happened with the blowing up of the Kakhovka dam in southern Ukraine, where Russians were pointing finger at Ukrainians, despite the fact the explosion happened on the part of the dam that was controlled by Russian. The Ukrainians pointing fingers at Russians. The international community doesn't know what really happened. This is a scenario that can play out with the consequences much more severe.
More severe?
More severe than certainly something that happened at explosion of the dam can happen in Zaporizhzhia today. And
well, should Zaporizhzhia, should that invasion of the area around, well, Russia is occupying Zaporizhzhia, should that have been stopped? Could it have been stopped?
It should be stopped. Whether it can be stopped, that's a big question, because the International Atomic Energy Agency really issues statements of concern and recommendations, but it doesn't have really power or resources to do anything about the situation that is occurring in this war. Ukrainians came up with a solution very early on to declare and guarantee that the sites of the nuclear reactors are no war zones, that armies are not entering that territory. Russians, of course, refused, and now when Ukrainians are moving closer to the Kursk nuclear power plant, they are appealing to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and International Atomic Energy is really can't help much in that particular case.
Well, the nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, Russia is a member, right? So they have to tread this careful neutral ground between warring parties, don't they? So they don't have the tools or the ability to stop.
Exactly. Russia is certainly a member of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Agency is associated with the United Nations. Russia is the member of the Security Council. The paychecks of a certain part of the people working for the agency comes through the Russian contribution, like contribution of other countries. And what that means is that we as a global community, we as citizens of individual countries, we don't have tools, we don't have also legal base to deal with the takeover of the nuclear power plants of the sort that happened in Chernobyl, of the sort that happened in Zaporizhzhia.
So how do we get around that? What do we do about it?
When it comes to the use of nuclear weapons, what we have today, de facto, if not de jure, we have a taboo on the use of the nuclear weapons. And I think this is a good model. There should be absolutely taboo on the military units of any sort of any country entering nuclear sites, whether there is a conflict or no conflict at all. Unless we find the way how to deal with the military takeover of the nuclear sites, we have no business to talk about the future of nuclear energy as the way to save us from the disaster caused by the climate change.
But a taboo is a sort of moral thing, really, isn't it? I mean, do you enforce this by rewriting international law? And in which case you can't do that without Russia, can you?
You certainly rewrite international law. And now with Russia being on the receiving end of the possibility that Ukrainian army comes closer to the nuclear site, nuclear power plant in Kursk, that really the main meaning of that and message for me is that everyone is vulnerable. It is in the interest of every country in the world. There are plus minus 440 reactors today. There will be more in the future. Every country is interested in that sort of agreement.
But if Ukraine has proved, with the invasion of Kursk, that everyone is vulnerable, isn't everyone also culpable too, because they're doing at Kursk what you've criticized the Russians for doing at Zaporizhia?
Well, so far, Ukrainians are advancing in Kursk. There is no, as far as we know, attempt to get closer to the nuclear power plant. There is no attempt to take over this nuclear power plant. So
but the threat is there.
Well, the possibility that something like that can happen is certainly there. And if Ukrainian offensive advances, the right thing for Ukraine to do what they asked the international community to enforce, not to enter the nuclear power plant and to make it a no-fight zone.
And without resolving this danger, in your view, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's difficult to see how nuclear power can be a broader answer to the solution of greener energy provision.
Absolutely. Before we find a way to protect existing nuclear power plants, we really can't build new ones, because that means increasing the risk of the nuclear war, in this new meaning of the term, in the future. So we can destroy the world before it is destroyed by climate change.
Serhii Plokhy, thank you very much.
Welcome.